The room smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the kind of scent that lingered in places built for quiet endings and final words. The downtown office of Abrams and Steele was still, save for the soft hum of the ceiling fan overhead and the occasional shuffle of documents. Afternoon light slanted through tall windows, casting golden stripes across leather-bound law books and polished oak. In a corner chair sat Walter Boone, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a clean black suit that fit him just a little too stiffly. His dark hands were folded in his lap, and though he sat slightly apart from the others in the room, his presence was unmistakable, not because of his size, but because of his silence. Walter didn't speak. He didn't need to. His quiet told stories no one else was willing to hear. Across the room, Veronica's children sat together. Stephanie, the eldest, perched perfectly upright with her arms crossed, eyes darting between her phone and the lawyer. Kyle kept checking his watch, impatience radiating off him like heat. Jacob slouched back in his chair, legs stretched out, face fixed in a smug half-smile. They wore black, as protocol demanded, but there was no mourning in their posture, only calculation. Walter noticed their sidelong glances, the way they dismissed him without a word. That wasn't new. For 25 years, he had stood beside their mother, raised her children, paid their bills, fixed their mistakes, been present in every sense of the word. But they never once called him dad, not even out of politeness. Walter remembered the moments in vivid detail. Driving Stephanie to the University of Michigan when she was too anxious to fly, quietly covering Kyle's first car payment after his job at the tech startup failed, mortgaging his modest home to fund Jacob's artisanal coffee shop dream that went bankrupt within a year. Through every loss and every lesson, Walter had stood behind Veronica, her rock, her constant. She'd once whispered to him, her voice rough from years of cigarettes and sorrow, "You keep this family together more than I ever did." He'd kissed her temple and said nothing, because love didn't need validation. But now, sitting in a room surrounded by leather chairs and tension, Walter felt more like a stranger than a husband. The lawyer, Mr. Abrams, cleared his throat and stood. "Thank you for being here. As you know, we're gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Veronica Elaine Hargrave Boone." Walter winced slightly at hearing her full name. She'd always been just Ronnie to him. Ronnie with the raspy laugh, the calloused hands, and the kind of gaze that could shatter you if she was angry or make you whole if she was in love. He glanced again at the children. Stephanie looked ready to pounce. Kyle's fingers twitched with anticipation. Jacob stifled a yawn. None of them looked like they'd lost a mother. But Walter didn't judge them. He'd long learned you can't expect depth from people raised without consequence. Abrams began to read. "To my daughter Stephanie, I leave the lakeside cottage in Maine, fully furnished, with the exception of the painting in the master bedroom." Stephanie's smile was instant. Victorious. She tilted her head slightly, like she'd been expecting it all along. Walter's stomach tightened. He'd spent 3 summers renovating that cottage, repaired the dock, built the pantry shelves, painted every wall. And the painting? He and Ronnie had bought it at a yard sale on their first weekend trip together. "To my son Kyle," the lawyer continued, "I leave my investment accounts, valued at approximately $900, 000, including all shares in Hargrave Morgan Enterprises." Kyle inhaled sharply, letting the air hiss back out between his teeth in triumph. Walter had memories of Ronnie saying she'd never touch those shares unless things got really bad. They'd weathered 2 recessions together, apparently. Not bad enough to include the man who helped her keep the lights on. And to Jacob, Abrams went on, "I leave the antique jewelry passed down from my grandmother, including the diamond brooch and the sapphire ring, along with the 1969 Chevrolet Impala kept in storage." Walter blinked. The Impala had been his project. He'd restored it bolt by bolt, weekend after weekend, under Veronica's watchful eye. Jacob had never even touched the steering wheel. But Walter sat still, his expression unreadable. He hadn't come for money. He'd come for peace. Abrams kept reading. dividing the rest of Veronica's belongings like slices of an elegant pie. A china set to her cousin Marion. Her vintage record collection to an old college roommate. Nothing for Walter. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The lawyer reached the last page. And finally, he said, adjusting his glasses, to my beloved husband Walter Boone, I leave my gratitude. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gratitude. Not a single asset. Not a word of thanks. Not a note of love. Just two words that cut sharper than any knife. My gratitude. Walter felt the heat rise behind his eyes. But he didn't flinch. He didn't look at the children. Though he heard Kyle mutter under his breath, guess he finally knows his place. He stood, slowly, with grace, adjusted his coat, nodded once to Mr. Abrams, then walked out. Outside, the world remained unchanged. Cars honked. People crossed intersections. A dog barked at a pigeon on the sidewalk. The sun glinted off buildings like nothing had happened at all. But Walter's world had cracked open. He didn't head home. Not yet. That house's house for decades was technically no longer his. Not according to that paper. Instead, he wandered past the park where he'd once proposed to Veronica under a tree she later called her favorite. Past the coffee shop where they'd argued about politics and laughed about Jacob's ridiculous attempt at a kombucha business. He ended up in a small motel off the 83rd in Madison. Checked in without a suitcase. Sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. He didn't sleep. 3 days passed. No one called. Not Stephanie. Not Kyle. Not Jacob. He didn't expect them to. Then, on the fourth morning, someone knocked at the door. When Walter opened it, there was no one there. Only a manila envelope on the ground. His name, Walter Boone, was written in familiar script. Veronica's handwriting. He took it inside with shaking hands and opened it. Inside were two things. A letter. And a second sealed envelope labeled, for the lawyer only after Walter reads this. He unfolded the letter. My dearest Walter, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I know you're confused. I know you're hurt. Please let me explain. I wanted to leave you everything. I mean that. But Stephanie, Kyle, and Jacob, they made threats. They said if I left you anything, they would contest the will. Said you were manipulating me. Said you were after money. I told them they were wrong. But they wouldn't stop. I was afraid not for myself, but for what they do to you. You spent a life being judged. I didn't want them to drag you through court. You didn't deserve that. So I did something else. The will they read? It's not the real one. That was just noise. I wanted to see who they'd become when they thought they'd won. But the real will? That's in the envelope you're holding. Everything. Walter, it's all yours. The properties, the accounts, the car, the cottage, everything we built, everything I had. It's yours. I created a trust, the Boone Foundation, in your name. And one more thing. Inside the trust are funds set aside for scholarships for stepfathers and guardians like you. The quiet heroes. The invisible men who do everything and receive nothing. This isn't just for you. It's for every Walter who ever loved without reward. I'm sorry I had to do it this way, but I needed them to show you who they truly are. You never asked for anything, and yet you gave me everything. Forever yours. Ronnie. Walter clutched the letter to his chest and let himself cry. For the first time since the funeral. Not out of pain, but out of relief. Because love had spoken, just not in the way he'd expected. He opened the second envelope. It was all there. Legal trust documents. Deeds. Account numbers. Signatures. Veronica had left him the world they'd built together. Weeks passed. He moved back into his home quietly, without a word to the children. Then one afternoon, they returned. Stephanie with a realtor, Kyle with legal documents, Jacob with a smirk. They didn't expect Walter to be there, but he was, sitting calmly on the porch, a stack of documents beside him. I'd invite you to sit, he said softly, but this won't take long. They laughed until they saw the papers, saw the real trust, the notarized will, the foundation. Ronnie's signature on every page. Silence fell. Stephanie looked like someone had punched her. Paul sat down without being asked. Jacob whispered, "No way." Walter didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. "You can inherit money," he said. "Standing. But character, that's earned." They left without another word. That night, Walter placed Veronica's letter in a frame on the mantel, right beside a photo of the two of them smiling in front of the cottage. He looked around the living room. The same one he'd painted, repaired, restored. For decades, it no longer felt like a museum of someone else's legacy. It felt like home again. And in the months that followed, the Boone Foundation grew. Applications poured in from stepdads, guardians, foster fathers. Walter met them, sat with them, heard their stories, cried with them. He wasn't invisible anymore. Neither were they. Because real love, the kind that builds, protects, and endures, doesn't always come with titles or trophies. Sometimes it's just a letter. Sometimes it's a foundation. Sometimes it's a man sitting quietly, finally seen. And that, Walter knew, was the greatest inheritance of all.